There is a kind of loneliness that only the self-aware understand. It isn't the loneliness of being alone, it's the quiet ache that appears mid-conversation when you're speaking from truth, yet their eyes reveal they cannot meet you there. I remember a night in a Brooklyn cafe sitting across from an old friend. I had just left a stable job for something that finally felt aligned with who I was. I tried to explain carefully, rationally, hoping they would understand. They listened, then asked, "Why can't you just be more practical?" I fell silent. Not out of defeat, but clarity. In that moment, I realized no explanation would bridge the distance between perception and awareness. They weren't hearing me. They were hearing their own fear. That night taught me something timeless. Awareness doesn't argue, it observes. It doesn't rush to be understood. It allows understanding to arise. And when you finally stop explaining yourself, not from pride, but from peace, that's when awareness quietly enters the relationship. Part 1. When explaining becomes self-betrayal. There's a moment so subtle you almost miss it. You're in the middle of explaining yourself why you made that choice, why you feel this way, why you need what you need. And somewhere between one sentence and the next, something inside your chest quietly gives way. You're no longer speaking truth. You're performing it. You're seeking permission for what was already real. "I just want you to understand" sounds harmless enough. But beneath it lives fear, the fear that without their understanding your truth has no right to exist. The fear that your inner world isn't valid until it's approved. I saw this happen to a friend. She spent 20 minutes explaining to her partner why she needed an evening alone. She spoke of work stress, deadlines, even a headache she didn't have. The simple truth, "I need space to feel like myself again," never left her lips. It felt too raw, too easily misunderstood. So she kept talking, building a case for something that needed no defense. That's what over-explaining really is, a quiet act of self-abandonment. Each justification distances you from your center, from the calm knowing that your needs are valid even when they're not understood. When you over-explain, you place your peace on trial. Every clarification becomes a plea for acceptance. Every "what I meant was" is another way of saying, "Please don't misjudge me." I've been there sitting across from someone I cared for, layering words over words, thinking if I could just explain better, they'd finally see me. But the more I spoke, the further I drifted from myself. I wasn't communicating anymore. I was convincing. There's a difference. Communication says, "This is what's true for me." Convincing says, "Please believe that my truth is acceptable." One arises from self-respect, the other from fear of rejection. And here's the quiet irony: the more you explain, the less they hear. People don't respond to words, they respond to energy. They can feel when your calm turns into pleading, when your truth becomes a performance. In that moment, the message is lost. There's a unique exhaustion that comes from needing to be understood. It's not the fatigue of the body, it's the soul's weariness from endless translation, from shaping yourself into something digestible, hoping someone will finally understand. At some point you have to ask, am I expressing myself or erasing myself, one explanation at a time? Because every word you add beyond truth is a transaction. You trade fragments of authenticity for the illusion of safety. And the cost of that trade is peace, the grounded, quiet peace that comes from knowing you are enough even when misunderstood. Awareness doesn't arrive as revelation. It unfolds in stillness the moment you catch yourself mid-sentence and realize, I don't need to explain anymore. And in that silence, you feel it, the gentle relief of coming home to yourself. Part 2. Why they don't hear you, they hear themselves. Here's a truth that frees you from years of quiet frustration. People rarely respond to your words, they respond to their wounds. You can say, I need space with the calmest tone, with care and intention. Yet the person across from you hears, you're abandoning me. You didn't say that. You didn't even imply it. But in their history space once meant rejection. And now, no matter how gently you speak, they aren't listening to you. They're listening to the echoes of everyone who left before you did. This is projection, and it shapes more of our misunderstandings than we realize. I once loved someone who tensed up whenever I grew quiet. Not the cold silence of anger, but the reflective stillness of thought. To me, silence was peace. To him, it was danger. In his childhood, silence came before chaos, his mother's rage, the storm before the explosion. So each time I turned inward, he braced for impact. Are you mad at me? Did I do something wrong? He'd ask over and over, trying to pull reassurance out of me like air from stone. I spent months explaining that my silence wasn't punishment. I softened my tone, found new words, tried again and again. But nothing reached him. Because the barrier wasn't in my language, it was in his lens. He was seeing me through the past, and no amount of explanation could rewrite what life had already taught him to fear. This is the quiet illusion of control that haunts communication, the belief that if we just explain it, write clearer, kinder, smarter, we can make someone see us truthfully. But language cannot override a filter built by survival. Words pass through it, distorted by memory. That doesn't mean communication is futile. It means we've been aiming at the wrong target. Most of us don't want to be understood. We want to control how we're perceived. And that's where the exhaustion begins. What actually restores clarity isn't more talking. It's silence. Not the silence that punishes or withdraws, but the silence that surrenders control. The silence that says, I've spoken what's true. The rest is not mine to manage. Silence is a truth amplifier. When over-explaining stops, awareness has space to breathe. In that stillness, people begin to hear themselves and sometimes realize they were never arguing with you, but with their own ghosts. I think of two people I know. Maya, intelligent, articulate, working in tech strategy, handles conflict with words. She explains from every angle, builds logic like a bridge. Her partner, James, is a photographer. Quiet, grounded. When tension rises, he listens deeply, fully, and speaks only when needed. People leave conversations with James feeling seen. With Maya, they often leave uncertain, not because she's unclear, but because her effort to be heard leaves no space to receive. James once said to me, I stopped trying to make people understand me. I just let them see what they're ready to see. The ones who can will. That's the shift from convincing to presence, from explanation to embodiment. Because in truth, a relationship isn't between two people. It's between two levels of awareness trying to meet. If one speaks from wounds and the other explains from reason, No translation will bridge that distance. But when you stop explaining and start being grounded, calm, rooted in your own clarity, you extend an invitation, not a guarantee, but an opening, for the other to rise from reaction into awareness. Some will meet you there, many won't, and that isn't failure, it's timing. It's the pace of consciousness unfolding. The moment you grasp this, truly grasp it, you stop chasing understanding from those not yet ready to hear. You speak less, mean more, and trust that the ones meant to meet you will. Not because you explained yourself perfectly, but because they've reached the same quiet depth where awareness finally listens. Part 3, the third space where awareness begins to speak. Most people believe relationship awareness is about understanding the other, your partner, your friend, your colleague. But it isn't. True awareness begins when you learn to observe the dynamic itself, not just your perspective or theirs, but the living space between you. The subtle dance, the invisible field where two nervous systems, two histories, two inner worlds try to find rhythm together. Few reach this level of perception because it asks you to step outside the story you're defending, to see not only where you're right, but also where you're triggered blind or replaying an old pattern you've never resolved. I learned this lesson the hard way in my late 20s. I was in a relationship that felt like a constant negotiation. Every conversation turned into a debate. Every disagreement needed a winner. I told myself the issue was incompatibility, that he was too defensive, that I was too sensitive. Then one night, after yet another argument, something trivial about whether we'd agreed to meet at 7 or 7:30, I saw us from the outside. It was as if I were watching two actors, each convinced they were the protagonist, both waiting for the other to confess fault, both so intent on being right that neither of us was truly present. And in that moment, I saw it clearly. He wasn't my opponent. He was my mirror. His defensiveness reflected my hunger for validation. My sensitivity reflected his fear of blame. We weren't enemies. We were a loop, a pattern feeding itself. That's the moment awareness enters, when you stop trying to win, fix, or convince, and start to see the other not as resistance, but as information. Not cold data, but reflection revealing the emotional pattern you've both created. Relationship awareness isn't about being agreeable. It's about exchanging reaction for reflection. And that begins with a pause. The pause is where healing begins, not the surface healing of apology, but the deeper one, where you notice the impulse rising and realize the words forming on your tongue belong to a past moment, not this one. I practiced this in small ways. When my roommate made a passive-aggressive comment about dishes, I felt the heat rise, the urge to defend, to justify. The mind said, "She always does this. She's trying to make me feel guilty." But instead of speaking from that heat, I paused, breathed, and said simply, "You're right. I'll take care of it. No defense, no explanation, no story." And to my surprise, she softened. The tension evaporated because I had given it nothing to push against. That's the quiet power of speaking without defending, not weakness, but the refusal to keep fueling the old loop. When you stop participating, the pattern loses its power. This doesn't mean you become passive. It means you learn to discern between communication and correction. Communication says, "Here's what I'm experiencing." Correction says, "You're wrong about me, and here's why." One opens the heart, the other closes it. Curiosity is the antidote to correction. Instead of asking, "Why would you say that?" ask, "What made you see it that way?" instead of, "That's not what I meant." Try, "Help me understand how you heard that." You're not abandoning your truth, you're expanding space so both truths can exist. Because most conflicts aren't about facts, they're about two people experiencing the same moment through two different nervous systems, both insisting their version is the only valid one. This is what emotional maturity feels like. Not suppression, not pretending, but the ability to hold your truth and another's truth without needing either to vanish. When you reach this space, silence changes. It's no longer a weapon or a wall. It becomes understanding, not the kind that agrees with everything, but the kind that sees the other as a whole human being, wrestling with their own complexity, just as you are. I remember the first time I felt this deeply. After a difficult conversation, we sat together on a park bench. Neither of us spoke, yet the silence wasn't heavy. It was alive, filled with quiet respect, with the release of needing to win. In that stillness, what remained was care. That is the third space. Not your truth, not theirs, but the space between where awareness speaks louder than wounds, louder than fear, louder than the need to protect yourself. Most people never find it. They stay in their corners, throwing words like weapons, hoping one will land hard enough to change the other. But silence doesn't disconnect, it creates the room where two people can finally meet. Not as adversaries, not as judge and defendant, but as two conscious beings standing amid the echoes of their past, choosing for once to see each other clearly. That's where real connection begins. And it's been there all along, waiting beneath every word you thought you needed to say. Part 4. When silence speaks louder than words. There is a language far older than words. You've felt it even if you've never named it. It's what you sense when someone says, "I'm fine," but every part of their body whispers otherwise. It's the subtle shift in the air when someone enters a room, the way presence itself speaks before sound arrives. It's the quiet certainty that tells you within seconds whether someone is truly with you or just waiting for their turn to speak. Words explain. Energy reveals. And once you understand this, the entire nature of communication begins to change. I learned this not from theory, but from observation watching my therapist. It wasn't her words that moved me, though they often carried wisdom, but the way she was. I would arrive tangled in anxiety, trying to articulate something I barely understood. She would sit there, still grounded, deeply present, like an ancient tree that has weathered 100 storms. She didn't interrupt. She didn't rush to fix. She didn't fill the silence. She simply held space. And something profound would happen. My own nervous system began to mirror hers. The frantic energy softened. My breathing deepened. The noise within me began to quiet. Not because she gave me answers, but because her calm presence gave me permission to stop fighting myself. That is the quiet power most people overlook. You don't need perfect words, you need presence, a different frequency. Calm transforms chaos, not by control, but by offering contrast. When someone is spiraling in reactivity and you remain steady, You give them a path back to themselves. But it only works if it's real, if the calm isn't performed but embodied. True awareness shows in behavior, in the way you listen, the way you pause, the way you resist the pull to react. Listening without interruption, not waiting to respond, but truly hearing. Allowing the other to finish even when you disagree. There's a point where someone who feels heard no longer needs to prove their point. The tension dissolves because they've finally been met. Holding space instead of forcing clarity. Sometimes people don't need solutions. They need tolerance, someone who can stay with their confusion without rushing it toward meaning. When we stop rescuing others from discomfort, we allow growth to happen on its own. I have a friend who embodies this beautifully. When I'm lost in something heavy, I call her. She barely speaks, just listens. A soft, here a yeah, I hear you there. And somewhere in that gentle silence, I begin to hear myself again. Not because she guided me, but because she didn't. This is the essence of conscious communication, saying less, meaning more. One clear sentence carries more truth than 5 defended ones. Silence between words allows them to land. A mentor once told me, if you have to keep explaining yourself, you're not speaking from your center. That stayed with me. I began to notice how often I'd layer justification over truth, as if clarity could be built from repetition. Now I practice speaking once clearly, calmly, and then stopping. It feels vulnerable at first, but it's liberating. Because when you no longer seek to prove yourself, your energy becomes undeniable. People can feel the difference between someone defending their position and someone simply being. The first wavers, the second stands. And quiet strength doesn't need to be loud to be felt. Recently, I disagreed with a colleague about a project. The old version of me would have built arguments, gathered evidence, and rehearsed rebuttals. Instead, I said calmly, I see it differently. I think this approach will serve us better. And then I stopped. He pushed back. I listened, steady, grounded. A few days later, he returned and said, I've been thinking. Maybe you're right. He didn't change his mind because I convinced him. He changed because I didn't need to. That's when peace replaces the need to win. Success stops being about persuasion and becomes about integrity, whether you stayed true to yourself while remaining open to another. Because silence isn't withdrawal. It isn't indifference or defeat. It's communication in its purest form. A declaration of steadiness. It says, I don't need to convince you. I know what I know, and I trust that truth can stand on its own. This kind of silence is rare and magnetic, because most people have never been in the presence of someone who asks for nothing, not agreement, not validation, not understanding, only presence. Presence meeting presence. Energy meeting energy. Truth standing quietly in its own light. That's when words become secondary and awareness finally begins to speak. Part 5. Living as the conscious eggs. There's a cost to waking up one far quieter than the world ever warns you about. It isn't the dramatic unraveling you see in films, nor the sudden enlightenment that fixes everything. It's more subtle, more private, the gradual realization that the deeper your awareness grows, the fewer people speak your language. You begin to notice it at dinners where conversations skim the surface and laughter hides exhaustion. In meetings where urgency is performed like theater. With old friends who still process life through blame, complaint, and gossip. The ways you once did, and you find you can't join them anymore. This is what I call the conscious exile, the moment awareness separates you from the familiar. And though it feels isolating, that separation is sacred. Not because you're above anyone, but because consciousness requires solitude. It demands that you step outside the collective trance, the agreement to stay shallow, to avoid truth, to keep performing rather than being. When you step out of that trance, people notice. Some grow curious, others grow uneasy. A few may even turn against you, not because you've done anything wrong, but because your presence becomes a mirror, showing them the parts of themselves still hidden. I remember a close friend once told me, "You've changed. You're not as fun as you used to be." It stung. What she really meant was, you're no longer playing the old games. You're not bonding through judgment. You're not feeding the emotional noise that used to keep connection alive. She was right, I had changed. Not by becoming rigid or self-righteous, but by refusing to keep shrinking myself to fit conversations that required me to be less conscious than I am. That's the quiet rebellion. Not loud, not defiant, simply the decision to stop explaining your truth to those who aren't truly listening. You stop justifying why your boundaries exist. You stop apologizing for your solitude. You stop trying to make your inner world more palatable to those who aren't ready to meet it. And in that refusal, something stills. A peace begins to settle, not the kind that depends on agreement, but the kind that comes from alignment. But awakening isn't a single event. It's a practice built moment by moment, choice by choice. Breathe before defending. When someone misunderstands or challenges you, pause. One full breath, inhale, exhale. In that space, you gain freedom. You can choose whether you're speaking from your truth or from your wound. Let silence complete your sentence. Say what needs to be said clearly, calmly, and then stop. Resist the urge to soften it with, "Does that make sense?" or, "You know what I mean?" The discomfort that follows isn't failure, it's your need for approval surfacing. Sit with it. Let it pass. Observe instead of explain. When someone misreads you, notice your impulse to correct them, and for once, don't. Watch what happens when their perception stands untouched. You'll meet your own fear of being misunderstood, your need to control their image of you. That's where detachment grows, not in indifference, but in allowing misunderstanding without losing yourself. Lately, I've been practicing one simple ritual once a week. I choose not to explain myself. Last week, it was with my mother. She asked why I wasn't coming home for a family gathering. Old me would have listed reasons. Work exhaustion, obligations. New me said I need this time for myself. And then stopped. She pressed. "But everyone will be there." I felt the familiar pull to justify, to protect her from disappointment. But instead I repeated gently, "I know. And I need this time for myself." The silence that followed was heavy but not unbearable. I stayed steady. I didn't collapse into explanation. And slowly she said, "Okay. If that's what you need," not happily but respectfully. That's when I realized she didn't need my defense to respect my truth. She needed my steadiness. Every time you resist the urge to over-explain, you reclaim energy. The energy once spent trying to make yourself acceptable. That energy becomes solidity, presence, freedom. Awareness deepens not in isolation, but in witnessing. Not for validation, but for clarity. I keep a voice journal for this reason, a place to speak truths aloud, to anchor them in consciousness. I'll say, today I noticed I almost justified leaving early, but caught myself. I was afraid they'd think I was distant, but really I was just done. And that's enough. Speaking it out loud makes it real. Awareness becomes embodied, and each time you name what you see, you widen the space between who you are and who the world expects you to be. This is what it means to live as a conscious exile, not bitter, not superior, not withdrawn, just awake. Aware enough to walk alone when needed, and peaceful enough to know that solitude is not absence, but alignment. Because the truth is, this awakening isn't about belonging everywhere. It's about belonging deeply to yourself. And when you no longer need the crowd's approval, exile dissolves. You come home quietly, steadily to the place within you that was never lost. That stillness you once mistook for loneliness. That's not isolation. That's freedom. Outro awareness is the end of explanation. There was a time when explaining was a form of safety. When words were your shield, the way you earned understanding, avoided anger, softened rejection. That wasn't weakness. That was survival. A child's wisdom learning that belonging required translation. But what once protected you now depletes you, because you're no longer that child seeking permission to exist. Awareness begins when you stop translating yourself for others, when you trust that your truth requires no defense and that authenticity is not something to be proven, only lived. Real connection doesn't emerge from perfect explanations. It arises when presence meets presence, when both people stand in their truth without the noise of justification between them. The moment you stop explaining, you don't lose connection. You finally touch it clearly, consciously, perhaps for the first time. Not the fragile bond that demands performance or agreement, but the quiet meeting of two aware beings choosing each other without needing to hide or persuade. That is relationship awareness. That is freedom. If this message resonates, subscribe to Depth Psychology today, where we explore what it means to live awake, honest, and deeply human in a world that rewards performance over presence.